right, Danny, we're back and we've got real hockey to talk about on the Breakdowns and Breakaways podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Provident. As I said, this is Danny Shirey. Penguins not... That was such a roller coaster of a game yesterday, man. 4-2 loss to the Chicago Blackhawks and Connor Bedard. Let's just jump right into it. We didn't really talk about this. You and I haven't had any conversations about what we're going to talk about. We didn't have any conversations about the game or what we saw or anything like that. The best I got is what you posted on Twitter and vice versa. So 30 minutes, I thought of good hockey, and then probably 25, 30 minutes of not so good hockey. But let's start there. Like, what was your flyover thoughts of the first game of the season for the Pittsburgh Penguins?
I am someone who frequently tells people not to overreact to small sample sizes.
Right.
One game, there's a lot of stuff that you could have that can happen in one game, and you don't necessarily want to be drawing conclusions on it. With that being said, to go from the amount of energy and optimism that this entire franchise has been surrounded by since Kyle Dubas took over the front office, to go from that and all that momentum they had to, in the first game, doing a lot of the same things that plagued them last season. Now, I'm not saying by any means start hitting the panic button this is bad, nothing's changed, but it's kind of glaring that, you're looking at, they gave up a goal within, 90 seconds after they scored one of their own goals. That was a huge problem for them last year, where they'd score early in a game and they'd give it right back, or the same thing would happen at the end of a period or opening up a new period. We saw some very, very...
Yeah, I was just going to say, somebody on Twitter replied back to one of my tweets that this was game 83 of the 22-23 season.
It felt like
at times it did feel like that, yeah.
So, and within that, a lot of what we saw last night was some pretty unspectacular defensive coverage from the Penguins in the defensive zone.
I saw one or two plays that, there's one in particular in the early in the third period where, it was a pretty high danger rebound that Shirey gave up. And I liked the way Carlson, was able to very calmly get it over to the corner and get it out of danger. But that was really the only time I thought good defense. I didn't really see a lot of good defense. I didn't really see a lot of play that inside our own zone that made me think, this is something to build off of. Offensively, yes, but defensively, what do you?
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest gripes with last season's team was their defensive play. Maybe not in overall terms, but specifically when they had to post up in coverage in the defensive zone.
Right.
I thought that a lot of their issues stemmed from being far too reactionary rather than being proactive in trying to anticipate the play. Now, obviously, that's a lot easier said than done. I can sit here from the couch and point out on the screen that, you got to be able to make that read right there. But at the same time, these guys are NHLers, and I don't think it's a ridiculous standard to hold them to when you see other professionals and other teams doing it well. Now, granted, we can get into the semantics of what the Penguins' DNA is, what their identity is, the kind of game they're trying to play. And while I would argue that they are going to have to obviously they're going to have to outscore their opponents this year to be good, but they're going to have to put a lot of goals on the board. This is not a team that's built to win a lot of 2-1 games, right? With that being said, there are going to be times like last night when they're going to be limited to 2 goals. Peter Mrazek stood on his head, and this is something I'll probably touch on here in a few minutes, but we could also go back into their finishing struggles of the past 2 years and scoring below expectations. It's just one game, but there's another example of you're making another goalie who's not that great look pretty great. So anyway, I was just talking about the defensive coverage. I just said 80 different things there, but basically I want to see, I remember what I was going to say now. In those games where you're only able to put 2 on the board, Yeah, I mean, that's not a recipe for success, but good teams still find ways to win those games. And there's got to be some sort of middle ground for them between what we saw at like their low points of last season and even within that game last night where we saw some of those defensive struggles. I'm not even necessarily saying they need to learn how to clamp down, because that I think we've learned that that's really not something that's going to necessarily happen with these guys, but I think there needs to be some sort of reaction here that moves them from what they've been and what they showed in game one.
I think that we saw last night that this hockey team is going to be the exact opposite of what the city's football team is. The city's football team wins by defense, and if the defense doesn't play well, Matt Canada's offense is not going to get things done, right? I think the Penguins are the exact opposite. I think they're going to win by offense, and that offense is going to cause their defense to not have as much pressure on them and not have as many times where they're, hemmed up in their own zone. The first full period, and I'd say like the first half of the second period, maybe a little bit more than that, but the first 30 minutes of that game or so last night, you saw them coming in waves. You saw the transition game. They were getting at that. I mean, the first goal was, a quick get it down into the offensive zone, get the puck on quick, rust with the tip in.
You were so excited about that one.
I was so happy
like, we talked about that. We talked about
it. But that's exactly what we had said the Penguins need, and that's what they did in the first 30 minutes of the game, which took all of the pressure off of the defense. Jesse Marshall had mentioned last night on Twitter about how, POJ and Chad Ruhwedel didn't look bad, and they weren't world beaters, but exactly what we talked about a few weeks ago, they weren't making mistakes. Now, they were on the ice for the third goal, but I don't think that third goal was necessarily their fault. And I know you had talked about that on Twitter as well. Maybe we can get into that later. But my point is, when their offense was clicking and when things were going well for them in transition and in the offensive zone, it took all of the pressure off of the defense and off of them having to be very responsible in the defensive zone. And as soon as that collapsed, as soon as they got away from that for whatever reason, the game fell apart on them.
Yeah, and I think as time goes on, they're going to have to, I don't even want to say learn, but they're going to have to adjust a little bit to extend some of those possessions, right? Because even though that the first half of that game, like it did, like I don't disagree with anything that you've said. However, I don't know that there was ever really a point of the game where it felt like the Penguins were really taking it to the Blackhawks. They didn't
sustain pressure, but it was a lot of quick transition stuff and getting pucks on net fast.
Right. So assuming that comes along, then all of a sudden you can start to put two and two together and see how that's really going to help in the big picture. I guess it's just, and again, I'm going to say it a million times. It's one game. You don't want to draw conclusions here, but I can't help but be a little concerned that they didn't really, even last year when they were so wishy-washy, they'd play a phenomenal 25 minutes, 15 minutes or whatever. And that didn't really happen last night. Then you look at the opposition, it's Connor Bedard running a lottery team. And it's funny, I called the Blackhawks a lottery team on Twitter last night, and I had people responding to me like outrage. And I'm not even talking about Blackhawks fans. I had Penguins fans who were like, oh, they're much improved this year. Like, they're not going to be a lottery team. And I'm not trying to be like a jerk to people who were interacting with me or anything, so I didn't say it. But I wanted to respond and be like, I will literally bet my life savings that the Blackhawks are going to be a lottery team or close to it.
They remind me of the 2005 Penguins. Remember the Penguins brought in John LeClair, Ziggy Palffy. That was when Sergei Gonchar came in.
Ziggy Palffy didn't work out too well.
Did not work out too well. But they brought in all of these older guys to surround the young phenom and kind of almost, Lemieux was back in the fold for a year or two there, almost to like, not cocoon Crosby, but like kind of give him people to look up to. And I feel like with Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno and Corey Perry, maybe not at the same level as the Penguins did in 2005, but I really feel like they're taking that blueprint with Bedard and giving him people to kind of, grow, help him grow and understand the NHL a little better. Now, I don't think that they're going to be that good because a lot of these guys are past their prime. All of them are past their prime. And I really think the only one that's got anything left in the tank for a long season is Taylor Hall, maybe. I think
he's still a fine player, but
he's not what he used to be.
He's not what he. I mean, obviously he had that one like outlier year, the year he won the MVP when he was with the Devils, but like he's coming off a career low point total. I know because I had him on my fantasy team last year. But even just watching him, you can still see a good player in there, but he's much more of a run of the mill top six winger now compared to a guy.
All of that to say, there's nobody there other than Bedard that makes you go, oh man, this is dangerous. It's just a lot of guys that are past their prime that I think are there to help facilitate him and his growth, not on the ice. That's pretty much. So I'm with you. They're probably a lottery team.
Yeah. So, and again, weird things happen from game to game. I saw someone tweeted out earlier today. They were like, yeah, the Pens, what was it? The 2019-20 season, the Pens lost a really bad game in the opener to the Sabres. And then they went on to lose like the next two games or whatever. I don't know that that's exactly accurate or whatever it is, but the point is like, yes, that game in the larger picture here, no, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, we're sitting here over analyzing preseason shifts of prospect guys looking for long-term outlook here. But then when the actual thing comes, it goes, oh, well, they get a pass.
Yeah.
That's not how I'm going to look at this.
Do you think that the way they lost compounds the general mood of the city and the panic? Because it was so similar to how they lost games, especially at the end of last year. I think if they go in and they lose 4-0, honestly, I think more people would be willing to just chalk it up to new team, new faces, got to get things figured out. They didn't understand, they're still learning the system. Though they would come up with X excuse for why a 4-0 game happened. Shirey didn't play well, whatever, but the fact that they had a 2-0 lead and they played such a great first half of a game for, they looked fast, they looked energetic, and then it was just gone. It was too similar to last year.
Yeah. A loss is a loss in the standings one way or the other, but you could make the argument that the fashion in which they lost to the Blackhawks is worse than losing 4-0, right? Because everybody talks about the veteran leadership and experience they have in that locker room and how much they've learned. I mean, we've heard every single guy in that locker room after a loss say, "Oh, we got to learn from it." And there's got to be a point here where
you've learned enough.
Yeah, I mean, not to say that you ever stop evolving as a player, both physically or mentally, but at the same time here, it's like, what are we're either overrating these intangibles here, both whether they actually mean something or whether these guys actually have that. And if it is an actual, I don't even know what I'm trying to say here, but if we are going to say that veteran locker room experience
is
matters,
something quantifiable,
if it's, well, I mean, I don't know how we would quantify it, but like, if it did matter that much or if it was truly that much of a thing, I don't see how it would happen with this kind of team. If it is, though, it's concerning that it happened to the Penguins.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think that them being the oldest roster in the NHL, I think they're at 30.8 years old is the average age on the team. You would want a team like that to know how to play with a lead and hold on to a lead, not give up a 2-goal lead and end up losing 4-2 to a very young, very inexperienced, aside from, as we talked about, one or two players, a very untalented team. That shouldn't happen. And that to me was that was the concerning part of that loss. And I think if that loss would have come in game 1 or game 51, I don't think it would be any more or less concerning. It's just, you don't want to see that from a veteran hockey team. Especially at home too, your home opener, like that. There's just too much there for me to let that slide as just one game. It is just one game. And I said this on Twitter, I do think there are things that they can build on, and maybe we'll get to that, build off of, I should say, but losing in that fashion just kind of, it either opens up old wounds for this fan base, or it just, as you said, with that veteran leadership is concerning in and of itself.
Yeah, here's the thing, like you said, if they had won this game 3-1 or 4-2 or whatever, and they walked into Washington, which is on Friday night.
Yep.
If they had walked into Washington and the same thing had happened, it would probably be like, oh, well, whatever. But I think contextualizing everything like you did, it's a hard pill to swallow, man. Like this was it was a new chapter for a franchise that badly needed some fresh air breathed into it. And again, I'm sitting here reflecting on everything we're saying, and I feel like we're painting some doom and gloom here. That's not what I'm trying to get across. But if we're talking about this game in isolation here, I think a lot of what we're talking about is valid. I mean,
I would agree.
Again, I don't want to get into the whole, jumping to conclusions and making sweeping assessments off small sample sizes. But at the end of the day, that's what we've got to work with right now.
You said doom and gloom. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. They did play a really good first half of a hockey game. And that sentence in and of itself isn't awe-inspiring, but I do think in the offensive zone, there were some things to build off of. I do think that their transition game, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record with that, but that's what I think they keyed on this offseason, and you could see that yesterday. I think the puck movement between, especially, elite players like Crosby and Malkin and Letang and Carlson, when they're all together and they're moving the puck that way, it's fun to watch. So there were some things I do think that they could build off of here. How do they take those positives and move them into Friday night and for the rest of the season and keep those things up for a full game?
Well, I would say that they don't necessarily, I don't know that it's something that they necessarily need to be, super keyed in on as they're moving forward, because they are already doing those things. I think it's more about augmenting those things by cleaning up the things we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
So I think a product of cleaning up in the defensive zone and, being a little bit more responsible and tactical when you're being aggressive and things like that, I think in turn is going to give you an overall better process, a better operation, which the Penguins are an offensive team, or at least they want to be.
Sure.
So at the end of the day, I see that if all of that comes together, that's going to help their offensive attack. I think what I really liked offensively from them, maybe the most, was their forecheck. I thought the forecheck was really outstanding, especially through the first, probably the first 30 minutes of the game. I know we keep kind of splitting this game into halves here, but it really did feel that way. It really did feel like two separate games there. I saw a stat from Corey Schneider earlier today, who does the All Three Zones project, doing all kinds of manual data tracking with all kinds of different micro stats. And he does like these game reports for big games. He typically does them for like all the playoff games, but he did it for the Pens Blackhawks game. And I saw that the Blackhawks had 20 failed exits, 20 failed zone exits. And now granted, that's certainly has something to do with the quality of personnel that they have, but it also had a lot to do with the pressure that the Penguins were putting on them on the forecheck. And I think that that's really, I don't want to make silly statements here, but I think the forecheck really can be this team's engine, because if they're not forechecking well, teams just absolutely dice them up in transition. And if assuming, again, I talked about how their defense and team defense does need to improve. I don't all of a sudden expect them by the end of the year to be a top 7 or 8 team in that regard. I just don't think that's going to be in the cards. But when the forecheck is clicking, that's obviously going to help mitigate a lot of the issues they have in transition defense, and obviously stopping other teams from getting to their zone.
I feel like the forecheck it was the engine of all of the really good Mike Sullivan teams that we've seen in the past. The Cup championship teams, they were like just unbearable to play against when they were forechecking well. I think that won them 2 Stanley Cups. It was transition and forechecking. Had high motor stuff. That's what I think Mike Sullivan wants out of his teams. That brings me to a question. Then we talked so much about Radim Zohorna last week. Now cap issues are going to be a thing with this team as far as moving players up and down. They only had 12 forwards on the opening night roster. They had 8 defensemen. Do you see a situation where if this were to be a thing for a week or two, where they kind of lose that in the second half of games, that aggressive forecheck, do you think they bring somebody up like Zohorna or like to kind of maybe because that's his game to fuel that? Or do you think this is the roster for the foreseeable future until, someone gets hurt or something else, like something else happens?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say about that is that I'm fully expecting one of the extra defensemen, whether it's Ryan Shea or John Ludwig, who was claimed off waivers from the Panthers the day before rosters were supposed to be finalized. I'm fully expecting one of those guys to go down here in the near future because teams just don't operate with
8 defensemen. Yeah.
Well, some of them do if they've got cap flexibility. What I was going to say is teams don't typically operate on a day-to-day basis with only 12 forwards.
Sure.
It happens, I'm not going to say all the time, but it certainly happens where a guy gets banged up at morning skate or a guy takes a puck off the head where not wearing a helmet during warm-ups kind of thing.
They need that extra guy.
Yeah, so I would assume that Zohorna would be the first guy up when that does happen. With that being said, I don't know that we'll see any sort of personnel changes, meaning guys coming in and out of the lineup specifically due to maybe the forecheck falling off. Now, we've talked about Zohorna, and he's absolutely a guy that can help them and complement them in that area. I just don't know that they're going to be so, I guess, hyper-focused on those kind of individual components because the forecheck, it's a vital and crucial part of the game, but it is only one part of the game too. So there's obviously things, as much as I've talked about that I like with Zohorna's game. There's obviously some things there that are keeping him out of the lineup. Like Jansen Harkins was claimed off waivers from the Jets. He's in the lineup over him now, and they've got a lot more, I guess, intimate experience with Zohorna as a player. So
I guess let me ask you this question then. How do you feel about the bottom 6? And again, one game, dude, I mean, aside from Noah Chari a couple of times, I didn't see anything from them. And I know that I opened up this line of questioning with, there's a lot of positives to build on, but all of those positives I thought were in the top 6 and the defense. I didn't really see anything encouraging at all about this bottom 6 in one game. Again, it could change. I want to put that caveat out there. I'm not trying to be, this is how it's going to be this season, but that was not a great showing from the bottom 6 of the lineup.
No, and I'll take partial responsibility for that because when I dropped my season preview the morning of the opener, I did all kinds of different sections on there, but one of my sections, I did a few predictions. And now I don't love doing predictions because nobody's predictions are ever right unless you're guessing blatantly obvious stuff like McDavid's going to win the Hart Trophy. Okay, good for you. But one of the predictions I made was that the third line of O'Connor, Eller, and Harkins would be a ton of fun to watch. Now, in the back of my mind, I'm sitting there thinking about the evolving player that we've seen in Drew O'Connor, and especially the preseason that he had where he literally looked like a beast. Now, granted, being a beast in the preseason doesn't mean that's going to translate to the NHL, to the regular season. But with that being said, it did inspire a lot of confidence that his game was going to go to the next level. Well, then you look on the other side, you've got Jansen Harkins, who dominated the AHL last year offensively. And while he has been a fringe NHL guy to this point of his career, and now he's 26 years old, you look at some of his individual skill sets. He skates really, really well. He's got a lot of energy. He's not afraid to, I don't necessarily want to use the term get in guys' faces, but he doesn't shy away from contact. He's kind of like a spark plug guy. And while Lars Eller's physical tools aren't what they were when he was a really savvy, underrated player back in the day with the Capitals, he still thinks the game so well. I thought that line, and they still might, again, one game here.
Sure.
Don't want to
they have to figure themselves out, especially Harkins has not been here
right
enough to really understand. I don't not understand, but to completely grasp, the system and how to play with these two guys. It's going to take some time.
Yeah, so I thought that line was going to be, and I still do think that line can be a lot of fun to watch. It seems like a line that, combined with the straight ahead speed of O'Connor and Harkins and Eller's smarts. Now, a lot of that is riding on Eller's ability to actually get them the puck in those times that he's going to need to. Because it does seem like there might be a little bit to be concerned about there, but I'll hold off on that because I've wrote about Eller several weeks before the season started and went into all that. So we'll reconvene on that subject at a different time. However, they bored the crap out of me when they were out on the ice. And granted, a lot of that has to do with you're not getting a ton of regular shifts. It was their first game together in a first regular season game together. It just didn't seem like there was a lot of opportunity for them to do anything. I don't know that it was a whole lot of what they were doing individually or as a line. It just sometimes games shake out that way.
The thing that concerns me about that line is I don't see any one of the three of them as a play driver. Now, it's a third line, so I don't know that you're ever going to have that on a third line to the degree that you would someone on a first or second line. But every time I've seen Drew O'Connor play well, it's been on Sid or Gino's line. Every time, I don't really know much about Jansen Harkins, but, dominating the AHL offensively is vastly, vastly different than, playing well in the NHL. And I don't know his skill set. I don't know that the little bit I do know about him, that his skill set is one that would lend itself to him taking over.
Yeah, no, I'll cut you off right here just to say, like, Jansen Harkins is not going to be a major play driver at the NHL level.
Everything you just said about Lars Eller applies here. He is smart. He's a savvy vet, but does he have the physical ability at this age and at this stage in his career to be the guy that will distribute and facilitate someone like Drew O'Connor and get the puck to him in the high danger situations and, positions on the ice? It's one game, but I don't know. I just don't. I don't think I see it happening. I honestly think that I'd rather see Drew O'Connor up in the top six and someone like Riley Smith come down and be a little bit more of a spark plug, because I think the way that he plays the game, so north and south, might actually benefit that line more than Drew O'Connor being on it.
Yeah, I think there is some merit there to talking about maybe putting someone like O'Connor up in the top six. I just, I really think there's a lot riding on O'Connor taking that next step, because if he becomes the player, maybe not the one that was lighting up the preseason, but the one that I think he's capable of becoming this year, like not having to worry about going up and down from Wilkes-Barre throughout the year. Like, he's starting the regular season,
finding some solid footing.
He has some solid footing. He has legitimately established himself as an NHLer. I don't know that it's going to happen right away, but if it's going to happen specifically for that third line, like, it's going to be O'Connor, and they really need that to happen, because if for whatever reason he doesn't take that next step, they're
in trouble.
Like you've been talking about, who else is it going to be? Like, I could say
Nylander, Heinestroza.
Yeah. Those are guys that are complementary pieces to begin with. Like
but that's my point. They don't have that guy.
Yeah. It's really, really interesting. And I'm not going to talk about Jeff Carter this week because I hate doing it. And I feel like I end up doing it every week anyway, because you tag me into it. But it'll be interesting to see, because I'm almost more concerned with the fourth line. Carter's part of that. I'm not going to talk about Carter. I'm going to talk about the line as a whole. But that fourth line to me just screams a line that's going to be like, people are going to be like, oh, they're rocking like a 53.5% expected goal share. I'm the data stats nerd, whatever, but I can already see it where there's going to be people that are like, oh, they've got a 53% XG share. They're doing okay. They're taking care of business. But then you go and look and they're averaging like a goal and a half every hour they spend out on the ice, and they've got a negative goal differential. Like, it feels to me that they're going to be able to technically keep their heads above water because of maybe the shifts that they're out there with Carlson, where he's just firing the puck at will, and all of a sudden it looks like their shot attempt differential is a little better, and maybe he jumped up into the slot to take a shot, but it's not necessarily them. And at the end of the day, I'm not necessarily so concerned with it doesn't necessarily matter to me if I need to say this so I don't sound like an absolute idiot. But basically what I'm saying is I would rather you have a 55% share of on-ice goals as a line versus one in any capacity. Are you following me here?
Kind of, sort of.
Let me try and get this out one more time, and then if I can't, we'll just completely move on. But I'm more concerned with their share of goals rather than the actual totals. Does that make sense? So
yeah, no, I think that I get.
Yeah. So if they're scoring only 1.5 goals per hour at 5-on-5, okay, well, they better only be giving up 1 per hour.
Yeah, it's almost like the differential is more important than anything else here.
Right.
Like if they score 5 goals in 10 games, but they only let up 2, that's kind of what we're looking for with that fourth line. Be better than the guys. You don't have to be great. Just be better than the guys you're on the ice against.
Yeah, and I think there are some people who will look for excuses in that regard because it'll be like, oh, well, they're taking care of business by controlling play, and that's me going back to the shot attempt share and the like XG share.
Let me break it down for the idiots like me. Don't be a bunch of bums out there.
Don't be a bunch of bums,
and everything will be fine. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, it does. Another thing I wrote in my season preview, one of my predictions was that Noel Acciari will not finish the season at center.
Okay.
I don't. Do I want to get into this right now? Because I'm going to have to talk about Carter if I want to get into this.
We've got time.
All right. I think Noel Acciari's skill set is far better suited on the wing.
Okay.
Now, I get that we're talking about a fourth line here that's probably playing around 10 minutes a game, if that, at 5-on-5. Acciari's skill set just is not conducive, though, like, to anything offensive.
He's a defensive first guy, and I'm going to be a pest to play against guy. He's the guy that's going to piss the other team off. Like, he's not.
And does that to you? And he's a bit of an energy guy too, not necessarily in like the Archibald type, but he's a guy that's out there. He's looking for physicality. Yeah. He'll bowl you over. Yeah. So my question to you is a guy like that not better suited on the wing?
100%.
Because I'm watching again, and I don't want to say that all centers need to be of a certain mold or that they need to do X, Y, Z in every single scenario. But as far as he's just very uninvolved in the play. And like, centers have so much responsibility all over the ice. They've got so much ground to cover. But anyway, I see Acciari. I see Acciari's best fit on the wing because I don't necessarily see him. We were talking about play driving a minute ago. I get that there's levels to that when we're talking about fourth liners here. But I don't necessarily see him as a guy who's going to be doing a whole lot of that. It's certainly not going to be Carter or Nieto. And then all of a sudden you're looking, it's like, okay, well, what is really going on with this depth, this forward depth?
Yeah. Yeah. To me, what it comes down to is the first line is going to play 20 minutes a night. Second line is going to play 20 minutes a night. So you have 20 minutes of the game that you have to figure out between the third line and the fourth line. And I think that third line, for all of its warts that we just talked about, I think if that third line can eat 13 to 15 minutes a night and be aggressive and be smart, I guess is the best word. That is the best case scenario for this hockey team. If that third line, I guess it's not for me. You're focusing on the fourth line here. I'm not focusing on the fourth line as much as I'm focusing on that third line needs to figure it out, and they need to be a productive line for 13 minutes a night. And then you only have to worry about that fourth line for 5 to 7 minutes, depending on how power play, penalty kill, power play, special teams breaks down. You don't need that fourth line as much.
I agree. Like absolutely, the third line is their success.
They're the key. To me, the third line is the key of this hockey team.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. And absolutely, their success matters infinitely more than the fourth lines. I guess the reason I just kind of keyed in on Achari there and that prediction of mine that I had was because I still have optimism that trio on the third line can be fun to watch and get the job done.
Again, we're judging this. I keep saying this and you keep saying we're judging it off of one game. It wasn't a great one game, but it's one game. And as much as I'm concerned about it, the potential's there. I can't deny that the potential's there. I guess I'm just not optimistic about it. But if I'm wrong and you happen to be right that this can be a fun line to watch and they can, put some goals in the net and, maybe Drew O'Connor ends up with 15, 20 goals this season. Who knows? Now, all of a sudden, this hockey team goes a lot further than I think most people anticipated because the black hole that is Jeff Carter and the rest of that fourth line. And I want to talk bad about Achari and Nieto because I do like Achari.
I mean,
but we don't have to worry about them as much.
Right. You get to a point where you've got to start putting guys in optimal spots. And now obviously we're super early in the season. You don't need to be worrying about honing and keying in for the playoff run or whatever that is. But I looking ahead here, it was an observation that I had. Achari doesn't necessarily look like the kind of guy who plays center on a team that's going to make a cup run. So that's why I make that observation.
I agree with that.
It's not necessarily I thought Achari played an awful game.
He didn't play center in Toronto, did he?
He's a guy that's played all three forward positions wherever he's played. When he was with Toronto, if I'm remembering correctly, they did use him as a face-off guy a lot, but then they would do kind of what the Penguins were doing last year with Carter, where he'd take the draw and then he'd go to the right wing.
Okay.
And again, in modern hockey, and you kind of hear coaches and players allude to it now, it's it doesn't really matter what position I'm playing because it's so free-flowing and whatever. It still matters. It absolutely still matters.
Yeah, I think that... I think it matters, especially from the standpoint of the responsibility that Mike Sullivan's going to put on these guys. Even if they're only out there for 5 minutes a game, even in the best case scenario, 5 minutes a game, 7 minutes a game, for those 5 or 7 minutes a game, you still have responsibility, and it can't be a dumpster fire for 5 or 7 minutes. And I'm not saying the last night was a dumpster fire, but I think the potential with he who shall not be named on the ice.
You know what? I will name him. I said I'm not talking about Jeff Carter. I will talk about Jeff Carter right now.
There we go, people.
I've got something good to say. I believe it was in the first period. Carter kind of found himself in a bit of a weird tight spot along the wall. He kind of had his back to the corner a little bit, but he had some defensive pressure in his face, and the puck came right through his skates. And typically it was the kind of play where something just absolutely maddening happens. But Carter, as the puck was coming to him, he managed to make this really nice, slippery one-touch pass to Achari, who had a little bit of momentum going toward the net. It wasn't some crazy good chance or anything, but Achari got a shot on goal out of it, and it was oh, okay, something good happened there. Now, it didn't happen the rest of the game or much at all for that entire line, because I wouldn't have said
Do you know what my wife always says to me?
What's that?
Baby steps are still steps. Since you said something good about Jeff Carter, I think that is a great spot to end this episode.
I need to get like my flowers for that. I got some good juju for saying something good about Jeff Carter, right?
That should just roll into the next episode, right? It's just good vibes for the next episode.
I don't know. We could come back and the Penguins are going to be like 0-4, and then we're actually going to really lay into them.
Yeah. If by this time next week they don't have a win, this isn't going to be a pleasant conversation, is it?
No, it is not. I will tell you what, though. I miss the absolute insanity of and like I was getting ramped up for it with the way the Steelers have been playing since the season started. But oh God, like people tweeting for Mike Sullivan's head the first night of the regular season, like inject that into my veins. These people are unhinged.
The highlight of that game was the Fire Canada chant. We're not a football podcast at all, but we're both football fans, and I used to cover the Steelers. This hockey team cannot do anything that will piss me off more than the Steelers offense. So we have that going for us.
I don't know. Have you seen that power play working? Which we didn't talk about by today for a reason.
Yeah, reason. Listen, the fact that Matt Canada is going to have a job because the Steelers scored a BS touchdown with less than 2 minutes left to go in the game on an absolute dime by Kenny Pickett. The fact that saved Matt Canada's job. I need to find a football podcast to vent about that one. It was just this hockey team cannot get me to the point that the Steelers have me. I promise you. Like they could do a lot of bad, but I don't think that I'm going to be as upset with them as I am with this damn football team right now.
I don't know. You know, we can swear on this show.
I used to be a pastor. I try to
still keeping up.
I try to keep it. But anyways, we got a lot to talk about this season. There's a lot of things that are going to happen even in this next week. The shows are probably going to get a little longer because we're going to ramble a little more. But it's been fun today. If you are not subscribed, this is the perfect time to subscribe to the Breakdowns and Breakaways Substack, to the YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, because we've got 81 more games of this stuff. We have a few months of this, and we're going to be here every week. We've got some cool things hopefully coming down the pipeline. We did not pick a winner for the giveaway. We completely forgot to pick
okay, so I'll run through this really quick. Eddie so generously offered up two prints of one of Sidney Crosby, one of Genny Malkin.
I'm not good at math, but I think they'll either be 8x10s or somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah. So Eddie very generously offered up 2 prints of both players of pictures that he took. Yes.
Really nice pictures. I'm sure that they're going to turn out. The prints will turn out
with the diagonal Pittsburgh jersey.
Yeah. They're really phenomenal pictures. Anyway, you generously offered them as a little like preseason hype giveaway. And I said that we would pick winners like an hour or two before the game started. I'm on my way over here and you're texting me, you're like, oh yeah, by the way, we got to pick winners. And I'm like, oh shit.
So listen, when this episode comes out on Thursday morning, it will come out with the winners. We will announce the winners when this episode comes out. So if you are subscribed to the YouTube channel and subscribed to the Substack, you are entered automatically to win. We'll reach out to you and we'll put it out there on Twitter and everything. But yeah, be looking out for those. I'll be in touch with how we'll get them to you. I'll be going to the print shop on Saturday morning. But I think the drills behind us is a good reason to say, hey, we're done with this episode and stop rambling. So again, subscribe everywhere. Keep up with us. Keep in touch with us. Throw us some questions. And we will see everybody next week on the Breakdowns and Breakaways podcast.